Welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm your host, Alex Epstein. Today, it's December 31st, 2019, at least as I'm recording this, and the title of today's episode is The Most Important New Year's Resolution. The Most Important New Year's Resolution. And I'll just get right to it since I have a lot to share today about how I am thinking about resolutions this year, and part of it is I'm not thinking as much in terms of resolutions. But in a certain sense, you can say with resolutions, you can think of a lot of different things. But I think ultimately, from a human flourishing perspective, the most important resolution, or at least a fundamentally important resolution, is to spend our time really well in the next year. So, whatever else is happening, and I can talk about, I want to lose weight or gain muscle or whatever people are resolving, or be nicer. Those aren't the most exciting resolutions. But, ultimately, those are supposed to manifest themselves in higher, more time in your life, and then higher quality of time in your life, whether short-term or long-term. And so I think it's worth, whatever else you're thinking about resolving on whatever time scale, that New Year's is a great time to think about, how do I spend my time as well as possible next year? And before I get in, so today I'm going to share 3 exercises that I think are very helpful in doing this, and that I myself have been doing. So one, and some of these I've, at least 2 of these I've given in one form or another before, but one is the positive focus exercise. One is what I'll call quality of time analysis. I don't think I've ever done that one on this program. And then the last one is what I'll just call plan, time block, and calendar your 12-week year. So plan, time block, and calendar your 12-week year. But before I go into those, I just want to share some thoughts I've been having recently about the nature of time well spent, certain background considerations. And I've been thinking about this in a couple of connections. One is I've been working on the new version of my book on energy/fossil fuels. So that's been making me think, looking throughout history and looking around the world and seeing, okay, today we have, we have much more time than our ancestors had, and then we have a far, we have a far higher quality of time, or certainly at least the opportunity to have a far higher quality of time. So that's been one domain in which I've been thinking about this issue. And then the other domain is just talking to different people or acquaintances or sometimes friends, and particularly those, and it's sometimes people I've known in the past more, who are having financial struggles, or where they're observing other people with financial struggles. And I think that raises certain issues about the nature of time well spent, particularly, I think, a mistake that is easy to make, particularly when you have financial struggles. So if we think about what goes into time well spent, I mean, the core of it is that you're spending it in a way that you experience as rewarding during the fact and or after the fact. And so three background considerations in terms of having this kind of quality of time are: one is your degree of choice in your life. So to what extent is your life set up so that you can choose things that you will find very rewarding? Looking at history, when people were choosing, today we think about what do you want to be when you grow up, and that's partly what do you want to choose to use your productive time on or your creative time on. But historically, the answer was basically farmer for most people, right? So they didn't have, and then people were not, in large part because they didn't have low-cost energy and thus low-cost machine power to farm and to do all the other kinds of activities we need to do to the world to make it an abundant and safe place for us to live. They had to spend most of their time farming, very unproductively. So, or doing other kinds of basic tasks like gathering firewood or getting water, even not even very clean water, but just these very, so for sort of the crudest attempts at survival, those took up most of their time. So you'd say, well, they don't have much degree of choice over their time. And then overall, they don't have as much time in their life. So I like to think a lot about what am I doing in my life to improve my degree of choice, short term and long term. And one element of that is how one how one I guess I'll divide it into two. One is, what is my earning power? So how much, kind of like the farmer, how, what's his farming power? How much food can he farm in a given amount of time? Earning power is a broader sense of that. How much value can I create in a given amount of time as judged by the market? Because the more value I can create, then then the more time of mine I free up. So I can decide, okay, I'm going to, if I can create enough value in a short enough amount of time, I can theoretically say, well, I'm only going to spend 10% of my time providing for all of my needs and maybe more. And then I can do other stuff, including, it can be leisure stuff, but can also be more experimental, passion driven, productive stuff. So that's a big variable in earning power. And then a very related variable, which is almost the same thing but from a different perspective, is savings. How good how good a job do we do at saving up money? And the more that we save money, the more we can earn interest on the money, and the more we can even live on the interest of that money. Now that can be a harder thing to do, but they're both hard to do, but they both have enormous rewards in terms of just maximizing our degree of choice. So that's something I think about a lot. And another element, and these are all related, but another element besides degree of choice is degree of physical comfort. Looking back historically, people were just in pain all the time, and that just totally undercuts so many different things in life. It almost by definition undercuts the quality of time. And then the third thing is degree of mental comfort. And this very much relates to financial. And this is what I've been thinking about when having conversations with or about people who are struggling financially. And sometimes the conversations will be about different habits. And it's very common for people who are struggling financially. I guess it's common for everyone, but it's particularly damaging if you're struggling financially to kind of spend for pleasure. That is, well, like I need to treat myself. I need to treat myself to this restaurant, or I need to treat myself to this trip. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit of credit card debt, but like, yeah, I need to enjoy myself. And there's something really legitimate there, because pleasure is a necessity of life. But I think that it's much, much more satisfying if one can find pleasure from things that have very low cost, and then one has the background pleasure, or the background enjoyment of having the comfort of financial security. There's just something that I think we tend to dramatically underrate about the enjoyment value of financial security and being on top of things. And I think this can happen at any level of income, but I've really noticed over the past several years in different kinds of ups and downs with my different business endeavors that it makes such a big difference to be in a position of high financial security. And that's now a factor that I weigh when I am considering different kinds of investments. Because I think, okay, I could lose X amount of money on this, but it could also be, okay, then I'm not gonna have the same level of financial security, and that's going to undercut everything, and it's also gonna undercut my degree of choice. So those are background considerations, but they may well have implications for any kind of New Year's resolution that you make in terms of just thinking about how do I maximize the quality of my time. All of these are going to be background, and as I'll share one big resolution of mine this year, sort of a two-part resolution in a little later on, and it's going to be very, very related in particular to degree of choice. Okay, so let's jump in. So the first exercise I want to share is the positive focus exercise. And I talked about this exercise, I believe, on episode 3 of the program. And it's something I learned from Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach. And it's very simple, but very profoundly positive. And for a little bit this year, I fell off the wagon of doing it. And I really noticed how it affected my momentum. And so I didn't stop doing it for very long, but even stopping for a little while, I really noticed, wow, at least I in particular benefit from this a lot. So the basic idea of positive focus is that you identify some area of progress in your life, an area of forward progress. And one of the premises behind doing the positive focus is that in general, you don't want to measure things in terms of how far away am I from some ideal in the future, but in terms of evaluating our progress, measure myself from how far did I progress from the past. And so in the positive focus, we're continually reinforcing that, which Dan Sullivan calls the gain. What's the gain that I made? So if you're thinking about, I like doing this every day, and sometimes I do it even in the middle of the day, and I like doing it every week. I do 10 a week, and I'll give you the rest of the instructions in a second because there's 4 parts to it in addition, so 3 in addition to identifying the area of progress or the victory. And then I decided for the year, I thought 20 was a good number, but I'd say anything 10 or over is good. So I'll share some of mine, but mainly I want to share the format of it. So just scrolling down my list. Here we go. Okay, so the way it works is first you identify the victory or the area of progress, then you identify why this is important to you, why this is progress. Then you identify, this just should be a few sentences. Sometimes it could just be one sentence. You want to make, how do I make further progress, or how do I make long-term progress? So I'll sometimes say I'm going to say to make further progress long-term. And then what's my next action? And it's nice if you can even schedule that next action. So it's what's the progress? Why is it important? How do you make further progress long-term? And then what's your next action? So for me, I'll just share one of mine in that level of depth, and then I'll share some of the individual ones just so you get a flavor of it. So one of my top ones is I spent a far higher percentage of my time this year in 2019 on projects I'm passionate about. In previous years, I undertook a lot of small projects that seemed like easy sources of high income, and I had some passion about them, but not the same degree, not really a full passion for them. So different kinds of things, including a lot of projects that involve different kinds of sales and marketing systems. And this year, much of my work was on a book that I really believe in, and then on a project that at some point I'll share. Hopefully, almost certainly in 2020, you'll learn about it. But it's something it's a project that I really believe in. And so that was the victory. And then this is important because I have very finite time in life, and I have achieved enough earning power that I can have a lot of choice over how I spend my time. So it makes no sense to spend significant amounts of time on projects that I'm not passionate about. So to make further progress in the long term, I can, and so sometimes these are more speculative ideas, but one is have some kind of commitment test. So whenever I'm considering a project, have a test where I really run it. I run it through that test, and maybe have some accountability person who helps me run it through that test. Because, as I've talked about in a different episode, I think the No Means Yes episode, it's just so, to say yes to something foolishly is to say no to something really positive. And then, so then there are some specific things that I don't necessarily want to go into here because they're pretty personal to me. But in any case, I'm identifying further progress long term. And then my next action is to take a 30-minute walk to think about what's next, particularly once I finish my book, what I most want to do after that. And that's coming up soon. So that's a very, very timely thing to think about. So that's an example of a positive focus. And I find that all of those steps are valuable. It's pretty valuable to identify the victory, but it's really valuable to identify why is it important, and then how do I make further progress, particularly the further progress, because if I have momentum and if I've done something that works and I have momentum, often the next good step is going to be related to to what I've done. So I don't want to, when I'm thinking about what I want to do next year, I don't want to ignore all the things that I've done this year that have been really good. And in fact, a big theme today is just going to be how do you learn from everything that worked well in the last year? So let's see. I'll just share some of my others. I finished the vast majority of a massive book upgrade. I've talked about that one. The next one actually just came up a couple weeks ago, but with the Ray Cronies interview. But I'm very confident in this one. I transformed my relationship with hunger. Maybe I'll discuss that more in a future episode. But if you hear the discussion with Ray, I mean, I realized that I was viewing things as hunger that weren't really hunger, and I was really viewing it as, oh, if my body feels any kind of hunger, then I really need to eat. Like, that's really necessary. And having a much more relaxed view of that has been very transformative. And then fasting has been very interesting. But the most important is changing the relationship or transforming the relationship with hunger. I moved to a really good place in Laguna that I really like. I learned, this is another subject that came up a couple weeks ago. I learned a lot about different thinking media. That was the episode 2 or 3 times ago, and especially how well I think with handwriting. And that in the last couple weeks I've been noticing even more, to the point where I'm basically not allowing myself to draft book stuff with typing. I'm requiring myself to write it by hand, and it's just dramatically improving the quality of my writing and editing. I saw some amazing live magic this year. I really, really like magic. I just love the virtuosity of it and how impressive it is, and they can do it under pressure, the skill of it. So that was a good one. I got a lot of new clothes that I love. This may seem trivial, but it's really good to enjoy what one is wearing to protect oneself from the elements. And so I'm well on my way. And actually, one of my New Year's resolutions is to find shoes that I love, which has been particularly difficult. If anyone knows of my basic specification, as I'm looking for something that is a kind of, it's in sort of the dress sneaker category, at least not like looking blatantly like running shoes, but not being dress shoes. But the dress sneakers are very popular right now, but they mostly have these very giant midsoles, which is the bottom of the shoe. So you see a lot of the Apple events now, they wear these shoes and they're blue or black with these like giant white soles. And I just find those too big. So I'm interested, and sometimes clunky. So I'd like something that's lightweight, that has a smaller midsole to it, and that's not necessarily super bright, so that it blends in with things. And I found that surprisingly difficult, but I really want to find something in that domain. So if anyone has any good suggestions there, I will be very, very grateful to you. Okay, another one is I got a lot of satisfaction doing the Human Flourishing Project and getting feedback from listeners. And one really cool thing is when occasionally I'll get feedback from someone like Ray Cronies, whom I interviewed a couple weeks ago, and then they'll really be applying the ideas on this program, or some of them at least, in a professional way, and using that to do real innovation in thinking or in communication. That's really, really cool. Related to one of my resolutions, so I had 2 resolutions I announced on this show. One was to find a really good primary care physician, and the other one was to find a financial advisor and set up a financial plan. And so the one I half did was I did the financial one fully, but the one I half did was the doctor one. And I didn't yet find that, but what I've done a very good job at is using my current primary care person and and a team of, and just the specialists. And I found that my primary care person is good at recommending specialists. And so I've been dealing with good specialists when I had real concerns. And so that's been a good resolution. Let me see where I thought I was going to have I have some more. I must have put them in the wrong place on my particular document, but with the financial one I'll just have there. I saved by far the most amount of money I've ever saved in my life. And also I put my investments in a central place, and I think invested them wisely. And I have to thank one of the listeners of this program who's become my financial advisor and has done a really amazing job, Darius Gagne, Darius and Gagne. He's I think, the chief investment officer for Abacus Wealth Management. It's definitely Abacus, Abacus. So he's just really gone above and beyond in terms of just giving me advice and really being on top of everything, and just basically transformed me from somebody who was good at earning money but not good at saving and investing it, to just really having it where, yeah, I'm saving and investing it on a consistent basis, and I'm putting it in places that make sense long term, and I'm taking full advantage of things like 401k. So that's been a huge victory this year. And then one final one is that this year I've definitely consumed a broad range of enriching content, and part of this is I have the audience here to thank, because I did the episodes on the search for truly great content, and I did get some really great content recommendations from you guys, and that has really just helped me so much, just getting recommendations, particularly from fields that I'm not in. And just one example is this came from my friend Chad Morris, the book The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, and now I listened to that one, and now I'm listening to, I think it's called Critical Chain, something like that, Critical Chain. And this is basically a really interesting business thinker who writes, among other things, business novels. And he has a really effective way of communicating his ideas so that they're very retainable. And it involves these novels that have these different kinds of Socratic discussions, and in general has people discovering ideas through solving difficult business problems. And I'm learning a lot from it about business, but also about how to communicate ideas. So that's been a big positive one. Okay, so that is the first thing I'm doing and recommend. And I like doing, I'm going to try to do the 4 steps for all of these. So again, what the victory is, why it's important, how to make further progress, and then what's my next action. Okay, so the next thing, I'll go through these ones more quickly, is doing a quality of time analysis. And the basic thing here is to look back on the year and say, when I use 3 categories. When I look back on what I did this year, what did I do that I want to do more of? What did I do that I want to do less of? And then what am I not sure about? And maybe not sure will translate into less of. And you can just do anything. It can be people you spent time with, ways you spent time, things like watching TV, movies, etc. And so just in terms of the more things, it's funny that this kind of ends up being kind of obvious, but still very useful to me, is I noticed that the things I underlined when I just wrote out a list of things and then classified them, a lot of them had to do with reading and thinking. And so maybe as a listener, that's not that surprising to you, but sometimes I have the view that, oh, well, I don't want to read too much because I already read a lot for work, but I really, really enjoy reading on other topics that aren't my own topic. Like I just mentioned, reading these business books recently, or actually listening to them. They're really good audiobooks. And it's just good for me to know about myself that, hey, I have a really high appetite for new ideas about things. And then part of that, another thing that I noticed is, hey, I had certain conversations or get-togethers with really smart, insightful friends of mine talking about ideas, and those really stood out this year. And sometimes it was a matter of visiting someone and spending a couple days or at least a couple hours if I'm visiting a friend in LA. But that time was really, really time well spent. Sometimes there can be subtle distinctions. So, for example, with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I'm a big fan of, I noticed that I find a lot of satisfaction in watching and applying instructional videos, but I don't find as much satisfaction in following. I've probably mentioned this before, but it's a good lesson for me to relearn in following the news about Jiu-Jitsu, including the drama about Jiu-Jitsu. And that definitely applies to mixed martial arts in terms like the UFC and following the different stories of different fights. And that I've noticed that there's a broad category of things where I don't end up feeling very happy about it afterward is anytime I'm doing something where I'm being hooked in a long-term way, where primarily what somebody is doing is creating anticipation. Like they're stimulating me in a way to create anticipation so they can continue stimulating me, that's not satisfying, although it can create a lot of desire in the moment. So I've noticed that even there's a significant difference if I look back on my satisfaction at most movies that I've seen versus most TV that I've seen. So if I think about it, I was just recently watching Pride and Prejudice, the movie, and then also the miniseries, but that basically is a movie. It's just a slightly longer movie. And I noticed, wow, that's a really enjoyable experience during, and then it leaves me with something because its job is to be a self-contained thing that really leaves me with something. Whereas things that are more serial or sequential in nature, like TV, they are often, their primary thing is to get me hooked, to sort of get me to escape into a universe and then to be anticipating what happens next. But it's not this self-contained thing that then I bring with me. It's more just I'm sucked into that world and distracted. So that social media can have a lot in common with that too, and different kinds of build-ups to fights I've been noticing that can have the same kind of quality as well. So those distinctions are helpful. And then one final thing that I've noticed about time well spent for me, which is informing one of my big resolutions, is that I really, really enjoy live events or live performances where I can see, and I'm going to ask for recommendations on this, but for example, I mentioned magic, where I can just see a very skilled person perform under difficult circumstances. And so I really like athletic events, and that's one category. And I like stand-up comedy quite a bit, and seeing that has some of that same element. I don't, with theater and whatnot and musicals, I do sometimes enjoy those. They're maybe not this, and even concerts, it's not quite the same. I often like listening to music while moving, but not as much sitting down and watching, although maybe the right concert I could get the same kind of inspiration from just watching the performers in person. But in any case, I've decided my big New Year's resolution this year is to attend 24 live events during the year. So 24, which is a lot. And so I'm going to budget my, I don't have infinite money to spend on that, but in terms of just my money to budget, leisure money, that's a lot of it is going to go into that. And then the related to this resolution, which is the really hard part of it, is that I want to have the time flexibility to attend events at any time, or at least to watch them at any time. I've noticed this year I've been on pretty aggressive deadlines and took on a bunch of projects, and there were a bunch of occasions where there was something that was happening in time where I would have really wanted to do it, but I couldn't do it. And I want to have, I'm going to work hard no matter what, so I want the time flexibility where I can basically attend anything at any time. And if I can't afford it or don't want to afford it, that's fine, but I want that time flexibility. So it's the attending 24 live events and then the time flexibility to attend events at any time. Now, if any of you have suggestions on what is a really cool live event that you think I might like, and I realize it can be hard to predict that for other people, but don't hesitate to give suggestions. But I'm just thinking, hey, what can be, what could be really, really cool, where I go there and in the moment I say, wow, this is amazing what these people are doing or what this person is doing, and then afterward it serves as a source of inspiration. And with the help of my assistant Kelso, I've gotten started on this. I've noticed that I have 4, arguably 5, depending on how I classify one of them, events. So the 4 I'll talk about are, one is so there's some actually two comedy and 2 magic. So the comedian Mark Normand, whom I think is really funny, I'm seeing him, and I'm seeing Norm Macdonald, and then the magician who's also kind of a comedian, Mac King, I'm seeing him, and then I'm seeing Shin Lim, who's a complete phenomenon. So I have those planned. And then there's also I guess it's not quite in the same category, but I was thinking of, I have a kind of, it's actually, this is a whole subject, but I'm gonna speak at an event where there's a hunting component, and I'm strongly thinking of participating in that, which I've never done, but I feel like that would be an interesting experience. And given that I'm killing animals to eat all the time through my behavior, although Ray Cronies may convince me to stop doing that, but I've at least done it a lot in the past, and I'm doing it anyway. If I take advantage of things like animal testing, I think it's good to have that experience. But if that bothers you, hopefully don't get too distracted from the rest of this episode. So the time analysis, what's time that you want to spend, what when you look back, what do you want to spend more time doing? What do you want to spend less time or no time doing? And then what are you unsure about? But it might be that almost all the time can be spent on either things that you did that you want to do more of, or things that you have good reason to think that you'll really want to do, even if you didn't do them in the last year. And then the final thing I want to talk about, so we've talked about positive focus, quality of time analysis, that's 1 and 2, is plan, time block, and calendar your 12-week year. Now, the expression 12-week year, this comes from a book called The 12-Week Year, which is a book I like, and the basic idea is think of your life in terms of 12-week years, not in terms of 52-week years. And so the idea is, now you can call it a quarter, but the authors like calling it a year, and I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. If you're just thinking about what's a unit that's easy to think of in terms of and to plan in terms of, 12 weeks is really good, and then you get to put a week between each of them, which is also really good. It fits nicely into the calendar year. But if you think about, okay, what am I going to do concretely in the next 12 weeks? And that can really help focus things, because it's very easy to become very sprawling about, oh, well, I'm going to do this and this and this and this, and then it gets overwhelming. But then if I think about, okay, what am I going to do in the next 12 weeks? That is a different kind of story. So I've in different episodes of this show, I've talked about how I categorize the different areas of life, and I still use this categorization. I use it for goal setting and for execution. So I have it broadly in terms of activities, companions, and foundations. So activities are what are the actual kinds of actions I'm taking, and so that would be creation, recreation, and rejuvenation. And so creation would be your work, and recreation is kind of your play, and then rejuvenation has some overlap with recreation, but it's basically what are you doing to really recover in different kinds of ways, and for lack of a better word, rejuvenate yourself. And so, for example, for me, in the next 12 weeks, I won't list all of them, but it's one is, okay, getting my book totally done. That's like something needs to happen definitely in the next 12 weeks. And so I have some others, but I won't go into those. So that's just the kind of thing where but I don't have that many others because it's 12 weeks, and it forces me to recognize, okay, I can only get a certain amount done, and a year can kind of serve as escapism. And then recreation, it's okay, 6 events. So now, okay, I don't have 24 events, I have 6 events. So hopefully you guys can give me some to round out my 6. And then I want to take a 1-week vacation at the end of March. And then I have some goals for jiu-jitsu. So you can take, those are those kinds of categories, and I won't go into all of them, but then companions, you can break this down depending on how your life is structured, because if you have kids, that'll be a category, but you can have like romantic, friends, family, coworkers. So those are 4 that I often use, and just think about, okay, what do I want to accomplish in those areas? And then the foundations areas are resources. So that's how much money you have now and in the future. There's environment. So what kind of environment do you live in? Physical health, and then mental health. And the thing I want to stress, besides identifying goals, is to actually put them in time. And so you can look back at the episodes on time blocking if you want to know more about how I think about time blocking. But the basic idea of time blocking is that different portions of life are set aside or blocked for different kinds of activities. So if I say right now I'm working on book work between 6 a.m. and 1 p.m. And so that's the time block of that. And with rare exceptions, I'm not allowed to go beyond that. But then in the afternoon, I'll have a time block for consulting work, and I'll have time block for different time blocks for, okay, this is when I'm spending time with my girlfriend, and this is when I'm spending time reflecting. But the idea is that whatever these goals are, they need to take place in time. So either you can specifically calendar them. So I have Shin Lim, he's calendared on my calendar. That's great. That's ideal. But sometimes it's just a matter of, okay, I know this goal is going in this portion of time. But if I have goals that I have no time block for, then it's very unlikely they are going to happen. So in the different areas, identify basically how do I want to spend my time. You can do the next year, but I suggest having the next 12 weeks. So do that and either have it on the calendar or have at least the category that it's in time blocked on the calendar. I think that'll help a lot. And so all these three things fit together, because if you do positive focus, that helps you identify what are the areas that you want to continue to make progress on. The time analysis, the quality of time analysis, helps you identify what was really the most valuable use of your time and what wasn't. And so to learn from that. And then in terms of planning the 12-week year, helps take that knowledge and then apply it in a way that will be concretely applied. So that's how I'm thinking about resolutions this year. This is completely compatible with things like, hey, I want to, do a new nutrition regimen or something like that. But you can think of that as that, whatever that is, that's gonna take place in time, and so that's going to be part of using your time in a better way. But I think sometimes New Year's gets thought too narrowly in terms of, how am I going to change as a person? But ultimately, the thing you want to change most is just as a person doing things that are more fulfilling to you and that will contribute more to your human flourishing. So that is today's episode. As always, if you have any questions, comments, love mail, or hate mail, email me at alex@alexepstein.com. Always appreciate the emails. No response promised. I should always qualify. And to join in on the discussion about this episode or other episodes, go to facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. And to get the updates about when new episodes come out, it's usually bi-weekly, go to humanflourishingproject.com. That is it for this week. I hope all of you have a great New Year's Eve and New Year. I've really enjoyed doing this show throughout the year, and I'm really appreciative of how many people are supportive of it and how many people say they benefit from it. So as long as that's the case, I am planning on doing it. I've found it to be time very well spent, and I've learned as much from it as any of you have. So have a great New Year, and I will talk to you in 2020.